which have years of insight and service to the continued progression of HBCU athletics. To help lead their discussion is Dr. Bill. He is an associate professor of sport management at Texas Southern University and is the executive director of the HBCU Athletic Research Consortium Conference. Dr. Bill is one of the preeminent voices of HBCU athletics, which includes sport business, sport leadership, and the sports culture theory. His research focuses on the sporting HBCU diaspora. He is the host of Dr. Bill's Inside the HBCU Sports Lab radio show, hosted in Houston, Texas. Dr. Bill, if you'd like to say a few words about each of your panels, I wish you.
Certainly. It is my pleasure to introduce this esteemed group of ladies and gentlemen. In regards to that, first, I'd be remiss if I didn't take a moment to talk about Greg Moore. He was the commissioner of Southern Intercollegiate Athletic Conference, I should say, is the commissioner of Southern. He called this morning and he actually had emergency. As you talk about athletic directors and your roles, he had emergency to get to Denver to work on some tournament issues with some of his member institutions. And also Lynn Thompson is not here. But with that, I think we still have the variety and the framework of HBCUs, and that's why it was really important. And oftentimes people look at HBCUs and they kind of see a monolithic thought. HBCUs, and I'll break down some statistics shortly to give you an idea of how diverse HBCUs are in terms of whether public, private, location. We know there are obviously throughout the South, South Atlantic, but even within states, there are different legislative frameworks that have them operate in certain ways. So I think this is an opportunity for those that may not get to see this often, that you're going to see hopefully something different and add to your knowledge on that framework. With that, I'll start to my far left. Mr. Melvin Hines, he is the athletic director at Alabama State University. Currently, a position he has held since 2015 after serving as the interim athletic director since 2012. Hines joined ASU in 2010 as senior associate athletic director. Prior to ASU, Hines worked for various athletic departments in a variety of positions, including Louisville as well as Alabama A&M. Oddly enough, that's up the hill, his rivalry, and I think I have a colleague that will get into that ties that rivalry together, so you might get a little banter over here. And so don't get afraid if they get to poking at each other, because those rivalries get pretty serious as well, as I'm sure that you understand within your own state. He was at Troy, University of Mississippi, among professional affiliates. Too many to really name, but I'll name the first one, the National Association of College Directors and Athletic Directors. So, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Sir. And then we have next to him, a good friend of mine, Professor Jeremy Cheek, soon to be doctor, assistant professor at Alabama A&M, as we mentioned. While completing his dissertation at Texas A&M University, he obtained his bachelor and master's degrees in business administration from Florida A&M. So I thought it was important to have a research component so people could look at those research intensive. And I wanted to have somebody that actually had the HBCU experience. So he has it from obviously attending an HBCU in FAMU, the only public HBCU in the state of Florida, and obviously one of the largest in the country. So that's his background, and now at Alabama A&M doing great work as he builds the sport management program there. Then I have a colleague, a friend, as well as fraternity brother. I think is important because you'll find out when you look at HBCUs that the bands that you hear about are extremely important, but not only the bands, but the fraternities and sororities, with some of them having their families at the very HBCUs that they're at, going back to Howard University, and some of them opening up and becoming the first landscape where HBCUs in terms of fraternities and sororities become extremely important within that makeup. So, and as he stated, we're very proud to say that we're the first. And see, we have a couple of people in the audience and on stage that rolls their eyes because they member of various fraternities. I'll name them to be respected. As Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, Phi Beta Sigma fraternity, as well as Omega Psi Phi fraternity. I'm sure they laugh, so I keep laughing. And then obviously you have the women's side, great sororities, Delta Sigma Theta, Alpha Kappa. Theta Phi Beta, to name those as well. And so with that, you talk about Dr. Mark spent 20 years as a marketing guru, sports marketing pioneer, pop culture expert. A lot of work he does is widely regarded as one of the nation's foremost experts in branding, the art of networking, sports marketing, consumers, and the hip-hop culture, which is extremely important when we look at the dichotomy of branding institutions. And he works not only with HBCUs, but he has a partnership with Alabama State that we'll be able to dissect. And one of those things he's done there that was really important in 2011, he received the NCAA grant for 2 years focused on empowering Division I student athletes, particularly at historically black universities, providing them with personal and professional life. So we'll give them some life development skills, bringing in that component and talking about how that goes. Next, we have Dr. Kiki Baker-Barnes. We met less than a year ago, but have quickly become friends, admirer of her work and her talent. She's the athletic director at Dillard University since 2006. So in a lot of ways, she worked through Katrina, rebuilt that program. I can tell with your smile, it was a lot of work. Held the position of head coach in the women's basketball team until March 2013 and had a chance to move over into the athletic director role. So she has also grown the program into a national model of student athlete success and community service. Since taking the helm, Dillard's athletic program has been the establishment of new sports teams and the university's first endowment athletic scholarship, which is very important when we look at the revenue and financial, and we'll get into some questions there. Barnes has become a national expert in strategic planning, organizational management, and program revitalization, leading her to set positions as a member of several organizations. And she also works with the conference, which is the Gulf Coast Athletic Conference, which is a conference that is actually housed in the NAIA. It's predominantly smaller in terms of enrollment, when I say smaller, not in terms of spirit, program private institutions that are members of the NIH. So it's the only conference that is fully engaged with HBCU schools that operate in the NIH. So they put men's and women's basketball, several other sports. The only member there, I believe, is Edward Waters, is the one with the football program, so the conference doesn't offer that. They wanted to put that out there. And she's a member of the Gulf Coast Athletic Conference at the administrative side. Next is Dr. Joseph Cooper. Joseph Cooper is magical in a different way. There's many people that know about Dr. Joseph Cooper's work. He has the ability to make friends across different frameworks, and so we met and worked on a paper and really have been quite friends ever since. So can't give enough accolades to Dr. Cooper, who joined the sport management program at the University of Connecticut in August 2013. Prior to joining the faculty at UConn, Cooper served as an instructor and graduate teaching assistant at the University of Georgia while completing his doctorate under Dr. Hawkins, who's put a lot of people out there, so you know a lot of this framework and his thoughts. He has his own, but you understand that framework of somebody as illustrious that providing that guidance. Research agenda focused on nexus between sports, education, race, culture, with the emphasis on sports and catalysts for holistic development and positive change in society. He is a member of North American Society of Sociology and Sports, NAS, North American Society of Management, to name a few. Also, you'll see on many of our panels, all of them are not graduates of HBCUs, but oftentimes some of their first opportunity to get into business was through HBCUs. Cooper is another example of that, where his mom was fully engaged in working at HBCUs, Bennett College, all Women's College, North Carolina, to talk about that. And so that's his connection. So in a lot of ways, while not attending at HBCU, he grew up around that atmosphere, what I call the cultural identity of HBCUs for a lot of people. So that's the panel I have. They talked about me as a moderator, so I will move forward. But at this time, if you would, we'll have a video that I hope kind of gets your heart, touches your heart, and then I'll show you why it ties into what we're talking about today.
I know
so that resonated with me, and that's a part of who I am. So I wanted to bring, I believe in coming as openly as possible. So I come with unique biases in a lot of different ways. And so I wanted to be upfront and open when we talk about HBCUs and why this is so passionate for me in a lot of ways. That's where we are. But to give you a little background on J. Cole and why this was enriching to me was J. Cole actually was reared at the footsteps of Fayetteville State University, a public HBCU in Fayetteville, North Carolina. J. Cole's first music video was filmed with Fayetteville State band and the cheerleaders that caused a bit of controversy from the FSU administrators that did not necessarily want their school branded with a rapper involved in the hip-hop scene. So there's individuals on both sides of this. That there's no perfect answer to this in a lot of ways. We had Brother Noah talk about in his panel where he said one of the quotes that resonated with me from the players that he worked with after all the work he did is that they moved the change from our hands of the shackles to our brains. And so this theology of be free, there's a lot of folks that are working and done very well, but oftentimes they still resonate with students that are first generation students that have the opportunity to get educated. So there's this duality that in many of the colleagues up here have to fight in terms of believing that they've reached some level of attainment, but still trying to reach back for another group to push that level of attainment. I'm sure that goes across many different ethnic groups, but that's why I want to did that. And actually, this ethnic identity of J. Cole is very interesting because his father is African American, his mom's actually European American, and he talks about this identity of white people. Because I know my mother, her side of the family, who I love. I have white friends. I know people from high school that I might not have hung out with outside of high school, but I think I got to know them pretty well. So I know they seem like human, but at the end of the day, I never felt white. I don't know what that felt like. I can identify, but never had felt like I'm one of them. Not that I wanted to or tried to, but it just was, it was. I identify more with what I look like because that's how I got treated. Not necessarily in a negative way, but when you get pulled over by the police, I can't pull out my hand, half white card, or if I just meet you on the street, you're not going to be like, this guy seems half white. So that's a framework and a dichotomy we work with HBCUs a lot of times. But we move forward. So the last thing before we really get in to some questions about the poignantly a solution and the framework where HBCUs operate. This was inspired by a chapter of Sports and Hip Hop, the winning at all cost mentality, the intersection of academic fraud and snitching on black college athletes. And when I talk about black college athletes, in this case, not just HBCUs, but African American students that play sports at historically white colleges. My colleague and I, Dr. Courtney Flowers, wrote a soon-to-be-released book on CRT race and sports. And it was a mix of that hip-hop language. And I wanted to talk about how that's embedded in that culture. And since, quote, since all about us leaving college early, I turn on the TV and don't see no brothers with degrees later. That was J. Cole in that, and he said that in the song Be Free in terms of that. He's actually a graduate in school, but didn't have money to actually pay his fees, so it wasn't until later that he actually earned his degree, to let you know how intriguing this is at the time. So with that, I want to thank you again for participating in this panel, in preparation for the next panel as we move forward. We're going to look at administratively, athletically, economically, and culturally, the framework of HBCUs as we call it times forward. To communicate this complex identity as you see in the book, we talk about the present feasible solutions to its challenges facing HBCU athletic programs. This panel will focus on analyzing and provide dialogue with this current complex state of HBCU athletics. So to give you some descriptive frameworks for HBCUs, you don't have any HBCUs operating at the FBS level. That is the highest level that everybody's aware of. Then at the NCAA Division I level, FCS, there's 22 schools, or 20%, operating at the Division I FCS level. NCAA Division IIIA, which are basketball-only programs, there's 2 operating out of the MEAC. NCAA Division II, there are 32 schools that operate at the Division II level. There were 2 schools at the time of this study that operated at the Division III level. That's since stopped. because they pulled the programs, including Spelman. NAIA Division I level, at one time they were separated, now they're pulled together, but there were 17 during the time of the study. Division I level, NAIA Division II were 5. There are 13 that operated the junior college level that people may not realize. And there's 2 that operated private association at the United States collegiate athletic schools for mostly private schools. So when we look at that medium force schools, looking at a Carnegie, you have 5 small, you have 12, very small, 22, 2-year large schools if you look at it. And finally, when you break it down from private to public, you have at the FCS level, where we talk about the 22, we have 19 that are public, 2 that are private, excuse me. And at the Division II level, we have 16 that are public and 16 that are private. And then at the NIA level, we have 3 that are public and 20 that are private. So that's the framework that I wanted to start this discussion off with. So the first question I have is getting into cultures for Dr. Cooper. The tradition of intercollegiate athletics at historic black colleges and universities is a mixture of this unique, historic, racialized, patriarchal social system that birthed such institutions, and the rich culture and pride that produced the creation of HBCU athletic programs and conference that govern them. Your research speaks to the framework of cultural uplift. Historically, what has been the significance of the HBCU athletic programs in American culture, and specifically in the African American community?
Thank you, Dr. Cavell. I'm glad you showed that video. I know some in the audience may think, well, why are we at an athletic conference? This is about college sports. Why are we showing all these images that don't seem connected? But all of our work and all of our identities and our existence is integrally connected to the history and her stories of not only this country, but of our world. So when we look at some issues on a more meso level, and we're talking about intercollegiate athletics as it pertains to historically black colleges and universities, in contrast to historically white colleges and universities, it's often reflective of endemic inequalities in our society. And so in order to make sense and understand how something like APRs would disparately affect historically black colleges and universities, how Professor Cheek's work on the Power 5 conferences and this multi-billion-dollar industry, which not ironically is largely driven by black bodies at these historically white colleges and universities, but yet historically black colleges and universities are totally neglected or isolated or overlooked in that process. It's not by accident. And so to answer your question in terms of historically black colleges and universities, the role in American society, a part of it is which aspect of American society. Dr. Cavell highlighted how HBCUs are not monolithic. The United States is not monolithic. So when you talk about historically what HBCUs represented, oftentimes for black America, it was a site of empowerment. It was a site of liberation. It was a site of freedom of expression. And athletic events, like many of our institutions, including black churches, including historically black fraternities and sororities, were spaces where we could create, we could express, and we could have some level of autonomy without the guidance or influence of Eurocentric values. And I think that's pivotal because when we talk about the success, and not only we talk about the cultural identity piece, you had several elite black athletes, Althea Gibson, Wilma Rudolph, right? You had these individuals. You even had John McClendon, who was a legendary coach, and Clarence Big House Gaines, who are in the Hall of Fame in Springfield, Massachusetts, who created forms of basketball that are now mimicked by what we would call legendary coaches at historically white colleges and universities, right? So if you look at the history of what HBCUs represented, it really represented the ability to thrive in the face of oppression and marginalization. Now, what it meant for what we would call aspects of America that were more influenced by Eurocentric values, as we see today, it was totally disregarded, right? There was a reason many of our HBCUs were founded during Jim Crow segregation, right? So it's this idea that we do not want you at our institutions. We don't care what you do on your side. We're not going to provide you with much state funding. We're not going to provide you with much publicity. Do whatever you want to do, just stay out of our way. In doing that separation, that actually cultivated levels of empowerment within our racial group. and across the African diaspora. So we're going to talk a little bit more as the panel moves forward, but I just wanted to provide that context to make sense of what we see occurring today, particularly as it pertains to HBCU athletics.
Thank you, Dr. Cooper. With that, since you talked about the revenue part of that, I want to get in a little bit of that and go to Professor Cheeks. This week, USA Today released its annual analysis of the finances of NCAA Division I institutions. So I think it's timely that we make sure we talk about that. When you look at Texas A&M University, topped the list at $192 million in revenues. And the University of Texas was right behind them at number 2 with $183 million. Let me say that again. That's $192 million and $183 million. Now, I'm sure that they work very hard to get all this money. But that's a lot of money in one institution. And let me show you why I say that. Compared to the highest ranked HBCU program listed at 146 with $16 million, you see the gap financially. That plays in a lot of ways. And so you might say, well, it's up to you to get that level. But I think that's a question that we need to really look at sincerely to see if that's the best way in terms of moving forward. And the other issue is that is 83% of that actually is subsidized. So the two public HBCUs, Prairie View and University of Texas Southern, to give you a juxtaposed right, one state, and I happen to be a Texas Southern, as you know, you have 208 and 211 respectively between those institutions, and they're at $10 million, 10.3 and 10.2 respectively. So the question I have for you, Jeremy, is why is it that it is important, particularly in the context of research regarding the resource deprivation of HBCU athletic programs?
Well, as you pointed out, you obviously can see the clear disparity between, can everybody hear me?
A little closer.
A little bit closer. Sorry about that. As Dr. Will pointed out, as you can clearly see from those statistics, you're looking at 192 million versus 16 million being the top, right? What I think is important, and what the article also pointed out, what's important to note is that the majority of that was subsidized by the university and the students, right? And if you understand, I mean, if any of you are familiar with HBCUs, that is one of the larger, I don't want to say issues, but one of the things that we talk about the structure of revenues for HBCUs. The majority, if not all, scared to say all, but the majority of HBCUs are subsidized as low as 70%, but all the way up to 80 and 90% by the institutions, right? And a lot of this is unfortunate when you think about the sense that we just had March Madness, right? Last month or so. And they were reporting now that the sums of the amount of money they're making with that tournament now is up in the billions, right? It's ridiculous when you think about the fact they're making billions of dollars and it's disseminated throughout the NCAA, but we're still posting revenues of $16 million. It goes into the whole resource deprivation piece, and I'll be brief about it, but when we talk about the opportunities that are available for HBCUs that make money, right? Most of the time they're making money off of classes, making money off of guaranteed contract games. So playing these contests at the beginning of the season where they're pitted up against other institutions, where it looks like a mismatch on paper. And I'm hesitant to say that because most of my football players, they'll say that they believe they can take them, right? But when we talk about the revenue generation opportunities that are available for HBCUs, it's sad and disparaging in a lot of ways when you look at the fact that seldom do you see any large media contracts, right? We talk about the majority of the labor force, especially in collegiate athletics, being black men and women, young black men and women. These institutions who are essentially serving that population still are struggling to get a piece of that pie, that larger pie. But going back to the original point, when we talk about subsidies and subsidies in institutions, you're looking at putting a lot of the burden on the backs of the students, right? So we're looking at student fees and negotiating essentially whether you're going to raise the student fees to make sure that you're still able to meet that bottom line. Every year these are conscious decisions that these institutions have to make. So when we look again at these disparities between what's being made at the top versus what's being made at HBCUs, again, it's disparity. And unfortunately, as you look again, you're essentially making business decisions year in, year out of how much you're going to, for lack of a better word, tax your students, right? When essentially that's your main force or your main source that you want to be behind, right? So it's a tough decisions again. And I'm coming from the perspective of being an administrator, a former administrator in HBCU Athletics, and essentially approaching student government saying, hey, you know, we might end up having to raise increase your fees a few cents, which might not seem that much, but you're talking about essentially to students that some of them can't halfway afford to pay for their classes as it is. But you're talking about adding on more fees on top of what they're doing. But again, I don't want to disparage the process, but it's just, obviously it's one of those things that we definitely take a look at and try to figure out ways that we can increase the revenue generation opportunities for Black colleges.
And then with that, you have the ability to disperse this money. So the question becomes, is that the appropriate way to disperse the money? And oftentimes, people look at purely that various institutions at the Power Five are generating this wealth. But they're all structural systems that allow the 80% of the money to go back to those institutions. And that's not just about generating revenue, that's also about politics and powerful systems that create that environment. So we're up here, or at least I am, talking about challenging that. And with that, I'm gonna come back to Dr. Mark Williams in regards to talking about this from a global perspective, a larger perspective. But I wanted to get into, we completed some critical analysis. So let's look at some bold solutions. So we had Mr. Melvin Hines here at Alabama State, and they're number 2 in terms of revenue. So they're able to generate a large state of revenue. Alabama State at 162 in terms of that revenue number of USA State. They're operating off of $14,597 million, if you would. 80% of that nearly is coming from distribution from a different area. But with that, I wanted to talk about some of the solutions that you're able to. You're governing a organization at Alabama State that has recently invested in campus development. That has included upgrades to athletic facilities, including a recently completed $50 million state-of-the-art stadium. Prairie View is undergoing a multi-billion-dollar campus improvement plan, including new athletic facilities for baseball, soccer, softball, track and field as well, just like Alabama State did. And you see that in a lot of ways that you all have been very successful in athletics, particularly in the SWAC in terms of taking on all-trophy awards, winning multiple championships. And I'll let you talk about the number of championships you've won over a period of time. But many suggest the first step of this is maybe a step of the FBS status. So as you talk about that and get in that question, will we see any of the several HBCUs make the move to join the FBS program over the next 5 years?
First of all, I'd like to say thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. When I look at this panel, it's very distinguished. You look at all these, starting here over, everybody's a doctor. You know, I aspire to be one of them one of these days. But you look at the dynamics of everything that's been discussed about HBCU athletics. Yes, we've generated about $14 million in revenue, but you also have to look at how much we're spending on expenses. A lot of times, our expenses outweigh our revenues. Because, you look across the board, it's an arms race. We discussed about how much we spent on facilities, just to keep up, with other institutions in our state, not just within our conference, but within our state, Jacksonville State, Sanford, UAB, Troy, South Alabama. They exclude the 2 flagship institutions, Auburn and Alabama, because we know we can't keep up with them because they're so far out there. But just trying to keep measures within our state, we spent about almost $100 million within the last 5 years on upgrading athletic facilities. Fortunately for us, we did not have to put that burden on our students. We took out bonds and did it that way. I was opposed to the bonds. I wanted to go out and, hey, let's raise money, let's see how much money we could raise, and then maybe go back to the bond market later. But that was a decision that was made actually before I got to the university, and we was going through the midst of it. We wound up doing it by bond. So, I mean, we have a debt service right now, about $3 million a year, that we're paying, to pay back these bonds. But the facilities, if you think about it, since 2012, we won 27 championships within our conference. 2-time Commissioner Cup champs, 4-time women's champ, 1-time men's champ. Right now, we're sitting in first place in the Commissioner's Cup trophy, winning by almost 20 points. The women, we got 2 events left on the women's side, and they've already wrapped up the cup because we finished first or second in all our female sports.
So you saying Texas Southern can't get it?
Not the women's trophy. The men's trophy, we're in first place right now by 5 points. Well, actually by a half a point over Jackson State. So we have 2 sports left to go. Be a tough race down to the finish because it's 4 schools right there together. But the facilities have helped. But you look at what are we missing out? I got a brand new football stadium that I'll put up against any stadium in the country. When I say any, I'm talking about the one here in South Carolina as well, because from amenities, I have everything, 22 luxury suites, a club lounge that seats 1,000 people, a recruiting lounge within the football stadium for our student athletes and our football team, a locker room with state-of-the-art TVs, video equipment, sound system, and everything. Okay, I only seats 26,500 people. That's the only difference between the stadium I have and the one they have here in South Carolina. Yes, at one time, when we built that stadium, we had the largest high-definition Jumbotron stadium in the state of Alabama. Well, after that, Alabama built a new one. Then Auburn built a new one. So I'm not going to try to keep up with them on that. At one time, we did have the largest within the state of Alabama. So we have pushed the envelope. We're pushing the envelope so far that, we publicly said it, that we would love to become the first historically black college and university to go to the FBS level with our football program. We're already competing with all those schools in various other sports. You look at my baseball team, we just beat the number 25 team in the country, South Alabama. We beat them. We beat the University of Miami when they were ranked number 4 in the nation. We beat Cal Fullerton when they were number 11 in the nation in baseball. Our basketball team went on the road, beat Virginia Tech at Virginia Tech. So we're competing on that level. You look at our track team, and I look at my track, and I'm just amazed what the track coach has done, because we have cracks and holes all in the track, almost like running on dirt. But our 4x4 relay team last year went to the Nationals and wound up becoming the second team All-American. So we're producing the student athletes and giving them opportunity with less. But we're leaving a lot on the table. Like I said, my stadium sits on 85. When I go to corporations and talk about naming rights, talk about advertising within my stadium, they tell me they can go to Auburn, Alabama, advertise at their stadiums. They see 100,000 people for 8 games a year. There's 800,000 people that get to see what's going on in a football stadium. Just 8 times a year. My scoreboard sits on Interstate 85. The statistics say it's almost 30,000 to 40,000 people travel past the interstate every day. Wow. So where do you think you get the bigger bang for the buck? Where 30,000 to 40,000 people see it every day, or just 100,000 people see it 8 times a year? But the companies would rather go to Auburn, Alabama, because they devalue the fact that African Americans spend just as much money, not even more disposable income than white Americans, but they choose not to advertise on my football stadium, which that's unfair. A lot of times because they watch because of the FCS in football, because I don't play on national TV every day, opposed to the FBS conference. And there's no disrespect to University of South Alabama, UAB, or Troy University, which is 40 miles outside of Montgomery. But they can get more advertising in a little town that only has 10,000 people, but because of FBS and football, the advertising with those institutions as opposed to advertising with Alabama State, which is the only Division I institution in the city of Montgomery. So those are some of the things that we'll probably get into a little deeper, so I won't hog all the microphone time.
No, I think what you shared is very important, so I appreciate that. For example, as we talked about the top two schools, the fifth one on the list, Alabama, 148.9 million, to give you exact in terms of the difference as we talked about the state of Texas. Now we go to the state of Alabama, we look at Alabama at 148.9 million versus Alabama State of 14.5 million. So as Professor Cheeks talked about, you see that difference. That's very important. So with that, let's go on a broader scale and not only talk about some of those issues at that level before we give you a framework of the opposite side of the window with Dr. Kiki Barnes. Not to say it's negative, but just a different framework. Let's go to Dr. Mark Williams and look at, there are many that believe that excellence is the result of balanced life, including academic achievement, the athletic success, and personal well-being. Your consulting work in many ways moves forward with the concept. And the current athletic landscape requires the development of life skill programs necessary. And a follow-up to that is, and what has been your experience working with HBCU, particularly Alabama State, moving forward with these life skill programs? As Mr. Hines talked about the need to not only facility growth, but actually producing the next generation of students going into the workforce.
That's a long question, man. First and foremost, I just want to thank you for inviting us to the panel, and Dr. Southall and all the students at South Carolina doing an amazing job. Those who know me know I like to talk, so I know I gotta chill for a minute. That's why I'm sitting up here like ready to go, ready to go in the game talk. So yeah, first and foremost, I get hyped when I come to this stuff, man, and I really appreciate. I'm looking forward to talking about it. But one of the things that Melvin Hines talked about that's really interesting is that not only do the teams compete at the national level, you have the bowling and the golf team that are also ranked in the top 25 in the country. So we're not talking about HBCUs, we're talking about at all the schools in the country. And in terms of the track team, they have a dynasty there. They won indoor and outdoor championships in women's track almost 7-8 years in a row, respectively. And it's a powerful program. The reason why we chose to work with Alabama State is because out of all the HBCUs that we saw that they had the most in terms of how they wanted to invest in their student athletes. And it's not that the other schools couldn't invest, it's just that financially they didn't have the opportunities to do it because they don't have the money to do it because of the revenue that they have coming in is probably less than what they're putting out. And a lot of people don't see that. They look at schools like Auburn and schools like Carolina and Duke, those big schools, and how much money they're generating. The NCAA in 2014 generated over $1 billion. And you look at the HBCUs and what that looks like. And in terms of the spending power of African Americans in this country, it's $1.1 trillion. And up to 2019, it'll be $1.5 trillion. So black dollar is very prevalent, but at the same time, as Melvin talked about, a lot of these companies are now looking at black colleges in terms of as an opportunity to filter money into those communities. So what I've noticed is that how we got into this area, I played basketball and ran track at North Carolina A&T, which is a Division I HBCU, historically black college. But I got my master's degree in sport management from University of Massachusetts and my doctorate from West Virginia. So I have a blended understanding of how this works on both sides. Right. And one of the things that frustrated me when I was working in corporate America, and I would look back at these universities, these HBCUs, and looking at the opportunities that the student athletes received in terms of the kind of opportunity they got from, let's say, just how they were working with the student athletes. And one of the things is that I did in my dissertation, I looked at how the Big Ten, how they focus on life skills for student athletes. And I looked at HBCUs, how much money they're giving back to student athletes. So what happens is the athletic directors around the country, life skills is not caught up to a lot of athletic directors. They don't really understand what life skills is, right? They understand about academic success, but they think that's the same. You would constantly hear the NCAA talk about, we graduate this amount of athletes, right? But are they functionally literate, right? Do they know how to handle bank account? Do they know how to write a checkbook? Do they know how to deal with relationships? Do they have leadership skills? And those are some of the components when the Champs Life Skill Program was started in 1991. The HBCUs were kind of left behind because the NCAA didn't provide dollars for it. It left up to the institution to provide dollars to make it happen. And what happened was a lot of these big donors at the big white schools, they were starting giving the money to these big white schools so they can have these life skill programs. And at HBCUs, you're challenged with things that you're not thinking about. For example, When you're in an athletic department in HBCU, especially at the Division I school, you'll have maybe the athletic director, their job is to help raise money. Whereas at a predominantly white school, you'll have a fundraising team in that department. You have a marketing team. You have a compliance team with maybe about 4 or 5 people in it. And at HBCU, you might just have one person doing 3 or 4 different jobs. So it's almost impossible for them to catch up, right? So the first school we worked with was Morgan State University, which is in Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference, Division I school, historically black college. The athletic director there is amazing, but the person that does life skills, they also was the head of compliance, they also were the cheerleading coach, and they taught 4 classes. I mean, how do you do that? And then how do you put the money towards student athletes as far as this life skill and building that up? And we've worked with about 6 of the 12 schools in the MEAC for life skills, but it's because of the NCAA grant, right? That was the only reason why we could work with them. But we couldn't continue working like that because the grant was up, so the universities, they didn't have the dollars to pay us. And the first school that jumped at the opportunity was Alabama State. Alabama State said, we have the money, we can do it. So for the last 2 years, we created a leadership academy, and I mimicked what we did I looked at all the Big Ten, looked at the models there. We mimicked what they're doing in the Big Ten and put it at HBCU. It's not a bigger budget like some of the Big Ten schools have, but it's a start. And we were just thankful that Melvin Hines believed in us enough and believed in and his student athletes enough, because Melvin was, if you heard in the introduction, he was interim AD for a good 3 or 4 years. That's unheard of, okay, interim. And he's still, in spite of being interim for 3 or 4 years, he's still invested in our company. And he didn't have to do that because he should have more focus on, am I going to have a job, so to speak, right? So that's why we invested with them. And we also look at the commitment that Alabama State has put into their student athletes, their stadiums, and how they're serious about their student athletes as far as preparing for life after school. So I'm mostly concerned about, student athletes being prepared for life. And a lot of schools and a lot of athletic directors, even in the Big Ten, you have about 5 or 6 schools that are really, really good, doing a great job. The other schools are not putting dollars towards it and putting dollars towards really helping to build, young people that are in a position to be healthy when they graduate from school. So I could go on and on about this, but I know that Sister's got to talk, and it's a very passionate topic for me. But I'm gonna give up the microphone so the sister can talk. So thank you.
Thanks for that. Yes, thanks for that, Mark. And I think you bring up a framework that I think needs to be discussed even more often. So I challenge people to look at that. With that, I say the best for last, if you would. Definitely will make sure it's not a little show here. People looking at me funny in terms of that. But Dr. Kiki Barnes, again, Baker Barnes, I should say, oftentimes at many academic athletic conferences, the focus of much of the research or dialogue, unlike we see here, focus on NCAA Division I Power 5 conferences. And even at some point, maybe Division II conferences. So the NCAA dominates in a lot of ways. If HBCU athletic programs are analyzed, generally the conversation leans on the NCAA Division I HBCU program that we talked about with Melvin Hines, as he's doing great work there. This year, the Dillard's men's basketball program had a great deal of success, going to the tournament in the first round of the game, qualifying for the NCAA tournament. As a progressive administrator in HBCU athletics, what are some of your strategies for moving the HBCU athletic programs forward in the future, particularly looking at the lens at the NAIA?
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm really excited. So some of the strategies that I think, and so let me give you a little context. Dillon University, our enrollment is around 1,100 students. We're HBCU, of course. We're a private institution. Our tuition is around 13,000 this year. I actually think we're going for increase, trying to keep up. But at small colleges, it's a little bit different. We're more concerned about having our student athletes be a part of the entire institution. Much like some of the things they've shared as far as, we don't have a compliance person, because compliance is not what we do at the NAIA. I have a full-time sports information director, and actually that's all my administrative staff. Everybody else is coaches. Now I have full-time head coaches in all of my sports. I will say that probably across the NAIA, you'll see schools where actually coaches are part-time coaches, and then they may have another responsibility. I don't believe that that is the way you can I don't think that's a successful model. Like, I don't think coaches can be successful building programs doing part-time. So one of the things that I've made sure is that all my coaches are full-time and they only do their sport. But what I see as very important to being able to move forward and to have strong programs is actually collaborations. You have to collaborate with other people. So yeah, I don't have a full-time champions of character person who does community service, but we have career and professional services and development. And so we collaborate on programs that will allow our student athletes to get that experience, internships, making sure I have an 8-day staff of students of about 15 students who said they're interested in sport management, who maybe want to be a part of some of these conferences that I may have to start leaning on you to send them to graduate school soon. Collaboration, you see that? I don't have a program, but I can collaborate with all of you to make sure they get an opportunity. But to me, it's all about collaboration. You have to work with other people. When you do not have the resources, be with people like my brother, Dr. Bark here. We're going to talk about some things we need to do. And then trying to find a way to use your resources and then invest. And so with building the program, I took over in 2006 after Hurricane Katrina. I started out with myself as the athletic director and head women's basketball coach, one men's basketball coach, and a part-time person. We did not have a facility at that time. We were utilizing Delgado Community College, which is the only community college in New Orleans. We were utilizing their space because our gym at that time was being used as storage space for the university, for the things that we were able to salvage from Katrina. And so the process of going from 3 sports to 7, where we are right now, and getting our facility back was all about collaborating with other people. Again, working with the local colleges. We used some time at University of New Orleans. That's actually where I graduated from, and I was a student athlete there. We used their facility for some of that time. We currently have a partnership and collaboration with Oxygen Health System so that we have 2 full-time trainers on our staff that work with our student athletes. When we came back to renegotiate that deal, I also added strength and conditioning to that. Because one of the issues we were having, I had insurance claims. There were so many insurance claims, it was ridiculous. And so when you have a lot of insurance claims, your insurance goes up, right? I was like, okay, but if we had strength and conditioning and we could do some of the pre-work, maybe that our injuries would go down. I can tell you in the last 2 or 3 years, I have 10 claims or less, because we were able to negotiate into that contract that not only do we have athletic trainers, but that they would have the strength and conditioning certification. So no, I don't have a multi-billion-dollar facility, and we don't have all of these teams of people, but we were able to negotiate a contract that works. And so I think we paid $30,000 for 2 full-time strength and conditioning and athletic trainers. $30,000. I couldn't afford one if I had to hire them full time. So again, I think just thinking outside the box, being creative, developing good relationships are very, very important to being able to build and to provide quality services for our student athletes. And so I do an exit survey with our student athletes, because I've always wanted our athletes to have a great experience. That's really important. I don't want them to feel like, because there is this notion that if you attend an HBCU, it's a lesser of a school than whether you go to a bigger school with the nicer amenities. So I worked really hard to make sure that we have equal services. We got an email this week, I heard from my SID saying we were in the top 15 for social media for the NAIA this year. I was like, yeah. We're very active on Twitter. You need to follow me at Kiki Baker Barnes. Follow me at Kiki Baker Barnes on Twitter. We are very active. Our hashtag is Go Blue, GEAUX, because we are in New Orleans, uniquely positioned with the French. Okay, and I'll give you that story later. But my point was the experience of the student athlete at a small, private HBCU is very important, and it should not be less than any other experience that they would have at any other institution within the NAIA. And for the last 2 years on those exit surveys, our student athletes have given us rave reviews on their experience and feeling like they got everything that they were looking for. And if they had the opportunity to come back and to play sports here and to earn their degree that they would return. So the future is collaboration.
Thank you. Save you for last, we're gonna follow up. Did have a video to show, but I think it's more important that we open the floor for discussion. So depending on the number of questions we get from the crowd, because I really want to get your input and ask some questions of various people instead of me following up. But the last question I have for you, I won't see you say best last, you get the most. Yes. And this is, in some frameworks, it might be a little tough, but I think we can handle it. In the space of a few weeks, at the end of last year, 2 small historically black private colleges announced significant cuts in their athletic programs. Concordia College in Alabama dropped its football, which officials said cost over $500,000 a year and ate up a third of the athletic budget. Still in college, we're further shutting everything, and still in college out of Alabama, as you know, shutting everything but men's and women's basketball. I think we might have some positive news on still, so I'll let you share that as well, in terms of them moving further with athletics. Earlier in the year, another HBCU paying college suspended its football program only after a year. It was reinstated. Data collected by the Department of Education shows that football cost paying almost right under $1 million in 2014-15 academic year. Previous Voorhees College was withdrew from the Gulf Coast Athletic Conference, which your school is a member of, as we talked earlier, still operating at the NI level. A couple of years before that, Smyrna College got out of intercollegiate athletics altogether. What are your thoughts on the justification of continuing intercollegiate athletic programs in the face of rising costs in athletics, as well as financial issues that have plagued HBCU institutions as a whole in terms of some of these concerns? And I know a lot of our audience want to know that answer the question, so I thought I'd do that.
That's a tough question.
I told you this.
Oh, well, yeah, that's a tough one. But I have a couple of thoughts. One of the conversations that we're having, I'm the president of the Gulf Coast Athletic Conference. So one of the conversations we're having right now is about our basketball tournament. Basketball in our conference, that is our #1 sport. It's where we think we have the most potential to generate revenue for our conference members. And so we had this argument, it was an argument, on one of our conference calls. And so I wanted to host the championship at Dillard. Now, our facility needs work, and working on a plan to do that. I mean, we've got to do some things for the facility, but I still wanted to host it because we were the only institution live streaming. Xavier University used some of the money that they have to build a brand new state-of-the-art facility. It seats about 4,000. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful facility, but my argument was, we're small college basketball. Why are we trying to be who we're not? I was like, we're not, we don't fill up. There's no time that Xavier's ever filled up that arena for 4,000 people, ever. Not for a basketball game. And the biggest rival we have is Dillard Xavier, and that game is as close as it gets. And I asked the question, I said, how many of our fans travel? Nobody travels. I was like, so if our fans don't travel, why don't we be true? Be true to small college basketball. We can fill up 1,200 seats. We can fill up Dillard University. It's going to be packed. The environment's going to be electric. It's going to be great. When we put that on live stream and all of our alumni chapters, and we put together watch parties, because what I wanted to do was have watch parties. Each school set up watch parties with their alumni chapters, because we all have alumni chapters, and we reach thousands of our alumni. We make it, and we charge them, $5, $10 or so, whatever you want to charge. Give them a $30 pass, since we know they're going to have a watch party. We can't get everybody. All right, charge $50 to have the party, and showcase it, and start creating synergy with all of our members and all of our chapters about our programs, and be true to small college basketball. To me, my thought is we have to figure out who we are and then be true to that. And so Stillman, he mentioned Stillman College. Stillman College was an NCAA Division II school. They are a private HBCU, between 900 to maybe 1,200, I think, in enrollment. Very similar to who we are, participating at the NCAA Division II level. I've looked at the NCAA Division II numbers. It's a lot of money to participate. So come on over to the NAIA. Come on over to where true small college basketball is, and promote that, be proud of that, and let's tell people, see, this is a great thing. And so we're still going back and forth. I think it's about right-sizing and being somewhere where you can be celebrated, and that, again, now they're going to be with like institutions. So now they can compete. What's wrong with that? I'm not trying to compete against LSU, my LSU college. I would never have a conversation about Dillard and LSU. We're not the same. I mean, and we have a different kind of value.
And different is not deficient.
Yeah, and it's not deficient. Absolutely. So for me, and when we talk about HBCUs and my thoughts about it and where Dillard is going and where the Gulf Coast Athletic Conference is going, it's about being true small college basketball. And let me tell you something, when we play Xavier at Dillard University, it is the most electric thing you have ever seen. It is unbelievable. It's a great, that's where I make $10,000 in ticket sales off that game. I had $15,000, $20,000 in sponsorships for that game, not for my season, for that game this year. It's electric. And so I really think it's about finding your niche, being true to that, and then providing the context, marketing, the branding piece, and getting people excited about it.
Thank you for that. Follow up. You know it's going to be tough for you to do this, but 2 minutes.
I'm going to do a lesson. I'm going to do a lesson. All right. One of the things that we're constantly hearing, I kind of touched on it earlier about just the structure at HBCUs. A lot of times when you see the structure of an athletic director, usually reporting to the president. Clearly, Melvin is reporting to the president, she's reporting to her president, but typically at HBCU, there's very few. And most of them are reporting to the vice president of institutional advancement, or they're reporting to the vice president of student affairs. So the dollars are going to be disseminated differently, and they're not taking it seriously. The other thing is, and I'm not worried about it because I'm not in school anymore, and I'm going to say it anyway. So what happens is universities, the board of trustees, they also have a hand in it, and in the athletic departments for the HBCUs. So HBCUs are not even their athletic directors aren't even looked upon as serious, not to be disrespectful, serious leaders. They're really not. So you've got the board of trustees controlling what goes on in that area. That's not their arena. And then when you talk about what the sister talked about as far as the economic impact, you look at the CIAA. How many guys are familiar with the CIAA? Okay? Not many people raise their hands. But it's the third in terms of generating revenue for basketball tournaments. Okay, you get the ACC, at all levels. ACC and the Big Ten are before them. It generates $17 million in sponsorship, okay? $17 million, there were close to 200,000 people come to Charlotte, North Carolina. It's over 100 years old. But a lot of the people that follow sport, if you're really interested in sport, not just black college sport, that is an arena you need to tap into. But one of the things that's frustrating for us as a company is when we go to these HBCUs and we talk about, we want to do this light show, we want to really work with you because these other schools are so much further ahead. Right. And what happens is when I was doing my research in the Big Ten, it was alarming that I noticed that the whole, all right.
Appreciate it.
I know.
I think great point. And as you said, he'll go in there, he really can. And I think for those, you need to come and talk to Mark on a serious note.
And my Twitter is NetworkingMan14.
Say it again?
NetworkingMan14 on Twitter and Instagram. I'm just happy that the sister followed me back on Twitter. I've been following her for a long time. I've been a fan of her, so she followed me back the other day, so I'm happy.
We had that discussion in my Twitter since we're giving Twitters as Dr. Kenyatta. DrKenyatta.
It's Twitter's long as this question, right?
Yeah. So with that, I'd like to open it up for some questions. I'm sure we have some questions, and I'd like to go ahead.
I'm really interested in Division II conference alignment. And when you look at that and the time demands on student athletes and the travel schedules they have, they just get to be ridiculous. And particularly in this area, a lot of it has to do with the conferences being segregated. I know that the CIAA and the SIAC have both extended invitations to the historically white colleges and universities. But what's it going to take for these conferences to become more integrated? I mean, it would save the conferences huge amounts of money when it comes to travel expenses. It would save the student athletes huge amounts of time, with their travel. I mean, you have schools like Johnson C. Smith and Queen's University 3 miles apart, but Johnson C. Smith has to travel to Philadelphia to play a game. Our school, Crowfoot College, we could play Claflin, 60 miles away, but Claflin goes to Memphis to play games. So it's really convoluted. What's it going to take for conferences to become integrated? It's really not an HBCU question. It's
No,
a
this is a question across the board. I really, if you don't mind, you want to answer that? I have thoughts on it, but I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think all options should be explored. Definitely from the financial piece, that would make sense, but I also think that there's, I'm always hesitant when we use the term integration, because, arguably, and Dr. Cavill has coined this way of thinking about when black athletes were allowed enrollment at historically white institutions, that was more assimilation. And so what I mean by that is, I am for those inter-conference, interracial, intercultural interactions, but not at the expense of diminishing some of the rivalries and the cultural histories between some of these institutions. So for example, I mean, you talk about schools like Grambling State and Morgan State, or you talk about like North Carolina A&T and FAMU. Yeah, it's a long distance away, but when you talk about the history of those matchups, and we're not only just talking about athletically, but we talk about the battle of the bands. We talk about a lot of these fraternities and sororities and these communities as these black-owned businesses that come out to support these events. So I think there is a way to strategically do it. However, I don't want it to be a case where, because many of the researchers in this room do research on historically white colleges and universities, and one of the bigger issues is the lack of diversity and inclusion in higher administration and leadership positions. So my concern is that we start to merge them in the sake of, the reason will be financial, but then how much does that diminish the influence of black athletic directors, some of these conference commissioners? Does that mean that they're no longer going to be able to yield whatever influence they have right now? So I think there's a strategic way, but I think all interests should be taken into account.
With that, Hines, I want you to talk about the oldest class and give some information that historically, which I think is one of the issues that you have there, is just the history.
Well, I'm just thinking about Division II, though.
Right.
Because you look at the Division II strategic platforms when it comes to regionalized scheduling.
But one of his
diversity,
histories that he's
things
going to
like
talk about is alludes to a Division II.
I think even with Division II and FCS, when it comes to that, we're similar. When I look at the Southwestern Athletic Conference, when I look at how far we're spread out, you think about Alabama State, Alabama A&M, having to go play Texas Southern in Prairie View.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a 10-hour bus ride. We've been fortunate enough in the last couple of years when we've gone to play in football that we've flown.
Yeah.
But in the past, traditionally, that was a 10-hour bus ride. And based upon the old NCAA rules, until they just relaxed the rules a couple of years ago, you only had 48 hours to travel to a competition. So 20 hours of the 48 were spent on the bus. But now, they relaxed those rules some, saying there's a 72-hour window now, so it helps, but, we fly. But you talk about Alabama State and Tuskegee, one of the oldest, the oldest black college classic in America, and, that we've had to disband that game just because of Tuskegee wanted to play the Division II playoffs. And the playoffs said they had to be finished 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. We always play the game traditionally on Thanksgiving Day. So we don't play that game anymore. That significantly impacted both of our schools' revenues generation. Luckily, we've been able to come to an agreement. We brought the game back, but from a historical standpoint, we're going to play it on Labor Day starting in 2017. But our traditional band, I'm public enemy number one because they say I ended the Turkey Day Classic, even though we brought the game back. But I'm public enemy number one because it's not on that particular day.
This is a 100-year classic. Let me go ahead and get this question here, and then I'll come to you.
Hi, I'm Rick Johnson from Cleveland. We heard Joe talk yesterday about how Howard is treated in graduation rates versus Kentucky and how the data is manipulated. We also know in FBS that black athletes are economically exploited. We also heard about where you guys fit in the revenues scheme. Do you all see that as a civil rights issue that can be supported by HBCUs in terms of organizing black athletes who are minority at their FBS colleges and may not be empowered to do it otherwise. And I ask that in the context of tomorrow morning, we have a college athlete activism session, and I don't really believe there is any. And Joe talked about the difficulty of organizing college players. So do you all see a role beyond the historical function in terms of helping an entire class of athletes, if that makes any sense?
I personally do. You want to get on this real quick, Chief?
Okay.
I think we need to recognize Dr. Singer and Dr. Hawkins, who have talked about a lot of this athletic activism. And so thank you for the work you're doing, and I think it goes into that.
Briefly, talk about activism, and this is something that, in my opinion, was somewhat lost over. It was on the cover, I think, for maybe a couple of days when it happened. But talk about activism and what they did over at Grambling State. Well, they refused to actually go and play an away game that actually was a potential money maker against Jackson State. Those student athletes got together and said, you know what? I don't appreciate the conditions that we're playing under. I don't appreciate the conditions that we're practicing under. They started utilizing social media to galvanize support, and they ultimately said, no, we're not doing it. They decided not to go to the actual game.
And this was before Missouri.
Yes.
Let me get this question, because I know we're coming close on time. Go ahead.
Recently, Chris Ballimore resurrected the African American Alliance College Network.
Yeah.
Back in the 80s, they used to
Very popular.
have these national cities. So how can we get these young kids on hoverboards wearing stuff that represents Tiger Bell or Grambling Titans? Like, how can we have these kids celebrating these classic, legendary?
I think you have to go to the where they are in terms of those spaces and market towards them. And sometimes we have a problem, we market towards what we like versus what they like. And I think the person to answer that is Mark in terms of his market.
I think, one of the things is hard to go back to activism and how do we get young people to start buying into these ideologies. I think you got to really start educating young people about the history, the historical context, and even back in the 68 Olympics with Harry Edwards and the movement back then. We talked about that last night, and really bridging the gap and bringing younger people in and mixing them with the old school cats like Dr. Harry Edwards and those kind of guys, John Coles, Tommy Smith, and really teaching them about activism so that they just don't randomly just start taking up causes just to take up causes. And I think once we realize that, you're going to start seeing an emergence of young people and older people starting to wear and represent those brands again and start talking about that. But I think it's a much bigger, we don't have a lot of time to talk about it, but it's a much bigger issue in terms of how we can get branding out there, because everyone knows as far as cultural identity in terms of setting trends, it's usually African Americans and hip hop culture setting those trends, and the majority of the communities follow it. You even have Kentucky Fried Chicken guy doing hip hop now on TV, right? So it's a matter of really getting people to buy into it.
I think we'll get this question in.
I think one thing that goes a step further, and it's something that we talked about, I believe we all mentioned. I'm gonna make a profound statement here. Everybody in this room is directly or indirectly affected by historically black colleges and universities. I talk about Alabama State. I didn't go to Alabama State. I graduated from Auburn University and played football there. My parents grew up on the campus of Alabama A&M, where they met, where I grew up. But you look at Alabama State, 915 South Jackson Street was where the Civil Rights Movement started. The Civil Rights was not just about, at the time, we talked about black America, but the Civil Rights Movement has benefited everybody that's sitting in this room, from men to women, to lesbians, to gays, to everybody. The Civil Rights Movement has been huge, okay? And you talk about the institutions that were in the forefront with those movements. And you talk about the black student athlete who was in the forefront during that movement. A lot of those student athletes were from historically black colleges and universities. You talk about the spending power of African Americans. You talk about how do we get those people to wear those different jerseys for Grambling, Alabama State, Alabama A&M, Dillon. You go back and think about when Martin was on TV, when Bill Cosby was on TV, he wore those institutions paraphernalia. He was in the forefront promoting those institutions. Now the companies that used to support those type people, like the Cosbys and the Martins, and supported HBCUs, that's where it's changed. And like I talked about a football stadium that sits on Interstate 85, which is the biggest billboard in the state of Alabama. It's not an institution attracted. It's not a major company that's attracted to it. I mean, I'll be public. We got a Hyundai plant in Alabama that makes the Hyundai. Hyundai is assimilated to the top, one of the top selling cars in America. The plant is less than 20 minutes from the institution. They would not put their name on that stadium.
I'm sure they have a lot of HBCU graduates working there. Go ahead and get your question in. Thanks for sharing.
Okay, I have a question and a concern. And the first question, you can come back to us for the future, Dr. What is the connection with the alumni and responsibility with support for athletics? Number one. My second comment is, when we talk about life skills, Dr. Williams mentioned something. We forget about the basics. And like he said, at a HBCU, we wear a lot of hats. Individuals that work there wear a lot of hats. There's a lot of responsibility placed on professors. Sometimes I think unwarranted, where that's where you're going to get your cultural development. When you're at HBCU, you don't have to take a class in African American Studies to get some cultural enrichment, because you're going to get it in a biology class if that professor's African American. He's going to talk about something dealing with your culture.
Let me get that response, because I know we're coming up to the clock, and I want to make sure we get a response.
Okay.
So if you can sum it up in about 30
Yeah,
seconds.
to sum it up, is life skills is important, but we have to think, if you have a young man that comes on your campus, a young woman, and as a freshman, and you ask him a question, they say, huh, what? And when he gets to become a senior, he's still saying, huh, what?
Right.
Then you have a problem.
Thank you.
That is, now, give me that first part of the question again.
The connection with the alumni responsibility with the assistants and that.
And I think everybody up here probably can pretty much say the same thing. Our alumni, I'm gonna use this loosely, our older alumni have a better connection with what we're doing and what we got going on campus because of the involvement that they went through coming up. Our new alumni has been a lot harder to engage, and I think the biggest part of engagement has been strictly the media. You know, I look at trying to schedule a football game, okay? If Alabama plays at 2:30, and Auburn plays at 7 o'clock, you know, I got somewhere, maybe put my football game in the middle. Because if I schedule my game at 2:30, and you go outside, it'd be the largest tailgate party in America. It'd be better than anyone that you can go see. But when the Alabama game's on TV, they're gonna stay out there and watch the Alabama game on TV at 2:30 instead of coming in. So for me to get that fan to come in the game, I gotta move my game to match up.
With that, we'll close it out. All the time. I hope you really enjoyed the panel. I think we got a lot into this, and I want to personally thank Dr. Southall for giving us the opportunity to show a different side of HBCU athletics. So personally, thank you for giving us this time. I want to thank my panel for taking out their time to do that.